The morning mist hung low over the glassy surface of Lake Whispering Pines as Leo and Marcus unloaded their heavy gear from the back of the truck, the cool air filled with the earthy scent of pine needles and damp soil. They had been planning this weekend escape for months, a much-needed break from their grueling corporate schedules, but as soon as the first fishing rods were assembled, their lifelong competitive streak inevitably flared up. Marcus, always the more assertive of the two, cast a sideways glance at Leo's brand-new graphite rod and chuckled softly while tying a shiny silver lure to his line. "That is a very fancy piece of equipment for someone who usually catches nothing but seaweed and old boots." "My friend," Marcus said with a smirk, his eyes gleaming with mischievous intent. Leo adjusted his faded baseball cap and rolled his sleeves up, refusing to let the playful jab slide without a proper counterattack. "This rod has more engineering in it than your entire retirement portfolio, Marcus, and it is going to pull more bass out of this water today than you have seen in your whole life," Leo replied, tapping the sleek reel confidently. Marcus laughed aloud, the sound echoing across the silent water, and extended his hand with a sudden spark of inspiration. "Let us make this interesting then, $100 to the one who lands the highest number of fish by sundown tomorrow. And the loser has to clean every single one of them plus by dinner at the steakhouse on the way home." Leo grabbed Marcus's hand and shook it firmly, a tight grin spreading across his face as the official challenge was locked in. They stepped down to the rickety wooden dock, their boots thumping against the planks, each man secretly visualizing total victory while the first rays of the golden sun began to pierce through the thick tree line. The morning mist hung low over the glassy surface of Lake Whispering Pines as Leo and Marcus unloaded their heavy gear from the back of the truck, the cool air filled with the earthy scent of pine needles and damp soil. They had been planning this weekend escape for months, a much-needed break from their grueling corporate schedules, but as soon as the first fishing rods were assembled, their lifelong competitive streak inevitably flared up. Marcus, always the more assertive of the two, cast a sideways glance at Leo's brand-new graphite rod and chuckled softly while tying a shiny silver lure to his line. "That is a very fancy piece of equipment for someone who usually catches nothing but seaweed and old boots." "My friend," Marcus said with a smirk, his eyes gleaming with mischievous intent. Leo adjusted his faded baseball cap and rolled his sleeves up, refusing to let the playful jab slide without a proper counterattack. "This rod has more engineering in it than your entire retirement portfolio, Marcus, and it is going to pull more bass out of this water today than you have seen in your whole life," Leo replied, tapping the sleek reel confidently. Marcus laughed aloud, the sound echoing across the silent water, and extended his hand with a sudden spark of inspiration. "Let us make this interesting then, $100 to the one who lands the highest number of fish by sundown tomorrow. And the loser has to clean every single one of them plus by dinner at the steakhouse on the way home." Leo grabbed Marcus's hand and shook it firmly, a tight grin spreading across his face as the official challenge was locked in. They stepped down to the rickety wooden dock, their boots thumping against the planks, each man secretly visualizing total victory while the first rays of the golden sun began to pierce through the thick tree line. The sun rose higher in the sky, burning away the remaining patches of fog and warming the wooden dock until the scent of pine was replaced by the dry smell of sun-baked timber. Marcus was still gloating over his initial catch, occasionally humming a teasing tune under his breath while carefully rebaiting his hook with a fresh, wiggling nightcrawler. Leo ignored the distractions entirely, keeping his focus fixed on the edge of the lily pads where the water suddenly seemed unusually still and heavy. He adjusted his stance, allowing his lure to sink a few inches deeper into the murky shadows, gently twitching the rod tip to mimic the desperate movements of a dying baitfish. Without warning, a powerful force yanked Leo's line forward, nearly pulling the rod straight out of his relaxed grip and causing his reel to scream as the drag released several feet of line. "Now that is not a seaweed or an old boot, Marcus, so you might want to get the net ready if you can handle watching real talent," Leo yelled, his muscles tensing as he planted his feet firmly on the dock. The fish was incredibly strong, diving deep toward the underwater roots and forcing Leo to use every bit of his advanced rod's flexibility to prevent the line from snapping. Marcus stopped humming immediately, leaning forward with a mixture of genuine curiosity and sudden anxiety as he watched the massive shadow thrash beneath the surface. After a grueling 5-minute battle of pulling and releasing, Leo expertly guided a monstrous, dark green largemouth bass into the shallow water and lifted it safely onto the dock. It was easily twice the size of Marcus's fish, and though it only counted as 1 point on their official tally, the sheer size of the catch shifted the psychological balance of the wager entirely. Leo smiled broadly, pulled out his own hand counter, and clicked it once with an exaggerated flair that made Marcus narrow his eyes in serious determination. By noon, the scorching summer sun was directly overhead, casting short, dark shadows beneath their feet and turning the once cool lake into a blinding sheet of liquid silver. The early morning excitement had completely faded into a grueling test of endurance, as the fish had retreated to the coldest, deepest parts of the lake where the hooks could not easily reach them. For 2 long hours, neither Marcus nor Leo had felt so much as a single, solitary nibble on their lines, leaving them sitting on upside-down plastic buckets while sweating through their flannel shirts. Marcus tried changing his strategy every 15 minutes, swapping his shiny silver lures for spinning blades, plastic frogs, and live bait, but the water remained stubbornly indifferent to his frantic efforts. Leo remained fiercely patient, staring unblinkingly at his floating bobber while the sweat dripped slowly down the side of his face and into his scruffy beard. The silence between them grew heavy and thick, no longer the friendly quiet of old companions but the tense, stubborn stillness of 2 rivals refusing to admit exhaustion first. Marcus finally broke the silence by opening a cooler, loudly cracking open a cold soda, and taking a long drink before looking over at Leo with a tired, challenging grin. "The heat is driving them crazy, Leo, or maybe they just got tired of looking at your overpriced equipment and decided to take a permanent nap down there," Marcus joked, though his eyes kept scanning the water for any sign of a ripple. Leo didn't even turn his head, merely adjusting his grip on the cork handle of his rod and offering a calm, confident reply. "They are just waiting for the right moment, Marcus, and true fishermen know that patience always pays off better than desperation," Leo said, just as a sudden, tiny twitch of his bobber made both men instantly freeze in anticipation. The tiny twitch of Leo's bobber proved to be a false alarm, a mere passing turtle that left the water as still as glass once more, but the sudden burst of adrenaline completely revived their competitive spirits. As the afternoon shadows began to lengthen across the lake, the temperature dropped slightly, and the fish finally woke from their midday slumber to feed along the cooling shoreline. Marcus noticed a sudden flurry of movement near a fallen pine tree half submerged in the water and immediately launched a precise cast directly into the center of the ripples. His instinct was rewarded instantly as an aggressive rock base struck the bait, triggering a short but fierce struggle that ended with Marcus triumphantly swinging his second catch onto the dock. "That makes 2 for me, Leo, which means the steak dinner is currently coming out of your wallet," Marcus shouted, his confidence fully restored as he clicked his counter to number 2. Leo did not reply, his jaw tightening as he immediately recast his line into the deeper channel, knowing that the remaining daylight was burning away quickly. Within minutes, Leo's line went taut again, and he smoothly reeled in a smaller bluegill, tying the score at 2 apiece and bringing the tension on the dock to a fever pitch. The friendly banter ceased entirely as both men entered a frantic rhythm of casting, reeling, and rebaiting, driven by the absolute refusal to lose the wager. Marcus landed a third fish just as Leo pulled in his own third, keeping them deadlocked as the sun began its slow descent behind the distant mountain peaks, turning the sky into a brilliant canvas of orange and purple. As the sun slipped lower behind the mountains, the sky was painted in shades of crimson and gold, causing the activity on the lake to suddenly reach its peak. The water's surface seemed to boil, and the splashes made by fish leaping to catch insects broke the silence. Determined to take the lead on the scoreboard, Marcus cast his line repeatedly and managed to hook at least a small fish on nearly 1 out of every 3 casts. Leo, on the other hand, chose to stay calm rather than rush, but the gap between them widened dramatically when Marcus caught 3 more fish in quick succession and brought his hand counter up to 6. "I think you'd better start getting your wallet ready, Leo, because tonight's stakes are looking completely free for me," Marcus teased with a smug grin as he tossed his latest catch into the bucket. Instead of engaging in the banter, Leo focused all his attention on the slightest vibration in his fishing line, and before long, his rod began to bend as well. With remarkable composure, Leo reeled in 2 bass back-to-back, then picked up the pace to close the gap, making the score 6-5 as darkness settled in. The 2 friends seemed to be racing against time on the dock, holding their breath with excitement while keeping a close eye on each other's moves. As the evening grew darker, the fish became even more aggressive in striking the bait, pushing the wager to a dangerous point where everything could change at any moment. The last remnants of twilight dissolved into a deep, velvety blackness, forcing Marcus and Leo to flick on their tactical headlamps, which cut bright, narrow beams of white light through the cool night air. The insects began to swarm around the artificial glow, their rhythmic buzzing accompanied by the distant, eerie calls of loons echoing across the invisible water. With the darkness came a shift in the lake's dynamics, as the smaller fish went into hiding and the larger, more aggressive nocturnal predators rose from the depths to hunt. Marcus, still holding a narrow lead of 6-5, cast his line blindly into the dark, relying entirely on the vibration of his rod and the subtle sound of the water to detect a strike. Leo kept his beam focused directly on the tip of his high-end rod, waiting for the distinct, heavy pull that indicated something substantial was testing his bait. Suddenly, both of their rods bent simultaneously, the synchronized snap of their graphite lines cutting through the quiet night like small gunshots. "Double hookup," Marcus yelled in pure exhilaration, his headlamp bouncing wildly as he wrestled with a heavy weight that threatened to snap his line against the dock's wooden pilings. Leo was fighting his own battle, his reel buzzing loudly as a powerful fish dragged his line in a wide, erratic zigzag pattern through the dark water. For several minutes, the 2 friends danced a chaotic ballet on the narrow dock, stepping over tackle boxes and avoiding each other's lines while reeling in their respective catches. Marcus managed to land a chunky catfish, clicking his counter to 7, but just seconds later, Leo lifted a thick walleye onto the planks, bringing the score to 7-6 and keeping the intense wager alive into the midnight hours. The clock on the truck dashboard ticked past midnight, and a heavy, bone-chilling dampness settled over the lake, causing both men to pull their hooded sweatshirts tight against the freezing night air. The frantic energy of the evening rush had completely dissipated, leaving the water deceptively calm and forcing Marcus and Leo into a grueling mental battle against sleep deprivation. Marcus was leaning heavily against a wooden post, his headlamp dimmed to save battery, while his fingers felt numb from hours of handling wet nylon lines and slimy bait. Leo, driven by the sting of being one fish behind, refused to sit down, standing straight at the edge of the dock like a ghost in the white beam of his light. Every muscle in their backs ached from the constant casting, and the friendly banter had long since been replaced by short, gruff whispers whenever they needed to pass the pliers or the bait bucket. Marcus thought he had clinched the victory when a sudden strike brought him a small yellow perch, clicking his counter to 8 with a tired, shaky hand that could barely grip the plastic device. However, less than 10 minutes later, Leo answered with a fierce vengeance, pulling up a sleek rock base from the deep shadow beneath the dock and bringing the score to 8-7. The realization that a single fish could decide the entire weekend wager kept their eyes wide open, staring into the black void of the water as the stars rotated slowly across the cloudless night sky. The sky began to shift from pitch black to a deep, bruised indigo as the first subtle hints of dawn approached, bringing a biting wind that whipped across the surface of Lake Whispering Pines and sent shivers through both exhausted men. Marcus was desperately trying to protect his narrow 8-7 lead, but his fatigue was showing in his clumsy casts, which were landing shorter and louder than they had the day before. Leo, sensing that time was running out, summoned a final burst of energy and changed his strategy, switching to a heavy jig that would sink rapidly to the very bottom where the biggest fish usually hid from the cold morning air. His tactical change worked brilliantly when a sudden, aggressive jerk on his line announced the arrival of a massive crappie, which he reeled in with absolute precision to tie the score at 8 apiece. Marcus cursed under his breath, his competitive pride stung by the sudden equalizer, and he immediately cast his line right next to Leo's spot, abandoning all fishing etiquette in a desperate bid to reclaim the advantage. The water seemed to boil with renewed activity as the light grew stronger, and Marcus's rod bent sharply just a minute later, allowing him to land a small sunfish and pull ahead once more with a score of 9-8. Leo did not panic, keeping his eyes glued to the water and immediately launching another perfect cast into the exact same deep channel. Within seconds, Leo's rod bowed deeply into a dramatic arc as a heavy fish took the bait, setting up a thrilling finale as the final hour of their 24-hour wager officially began. The sun finally broke completely over the eastern horizon, casting long, dramatic shadows and painting the entire lake in a brilliant, blinding gold just as the final minutes of the 24-hour wager ticked away. Leo expertly guided his thrashing fish toward the dock, lifting a beautiful, shimmering smallmouth bass out of the water to tie the score at 9 apiece with only seconds remaining on the clock. Marcus, refusing to accept a draw after a grueling day and night of intense competition, launched one last desperate cast into the golden ripples, his lure hitting the water with a soft splash that seemed to echo through the morning silence. Almost instantly, both of their rods twitched violently at the exact same moment, triggering a frantic, synchronized race against time as both men reeled with every ounce of their remaining strength. They pulled their final catches onto the wooden planks simultaneously, their breathless laughter breaking the silence as they looked at the two splashing fish and realized the final score stood at an absolute dead heat of 10-10. Exhausted but exhilarated, Marcus dropped his rod, looked at Leo with a grin of profound respect, and extended his hand to concede that they would both be paying for the steak dinner tonight.